All right, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jasmine. I am the communications intern with Northwoods and Waters here. And I will go ahead and kick off our live for tonight. We are the Northwoods and Waters of the St. Croix Heritage Area, and we work to unite the people of the St. Croix River watershed on behalf of our shared natural, cultural, and historical resources. So what that watershed is, it spans 2 states, 4 sovereign nations, over 7,000 square miles, 18 counties, 32 sub-watersheds, 114 zip codes, and 12,000 years of human history. So it's a very vast area, both culturally and physically. Here's a little bit more in depth as to what our goals are. Number one is to create sustainable economic opportunities based on our region's heritage to enhance our community's livability and quality of life. Our other goal is to also connect the region in order to help preserve and enhance the historical, cultural, and natural resources that exist within our nationally distinctive watershed. And last, to increase awareness and understanding of our heritage stories and the resources that demonstrate those stories in order to raise awareness among and provide educational opportunities for the region's residents, as well as promote and interpret the region to visitors and a global audience. The U.S. has, excuse me. Sorry, I can't seem to get my slides here. The U.S. has a lot of national heritage areas, as you can see, and each tells a significant part of the nation's history. But as you can see, there is none in Minnesota or Wisconsin. And so with that being said, let's put the national in our name and be the first one in between these 2 states with the St. Croix heritage area. So at this point, I will pass it over to Alyssa so she can talk about what's going to happen tonight.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Alyssa Otten. I am the program manager for the Heritage area. I am thrilled to have you all here tonight and to welcome Haley to talk to us about the really unique and fascinating history of Silverbrook Mansion. Before I introduce Haley, just a little reminder to all of our participants to mute yourself while we're letting Haley speak to us. And then at the end, we'll have a Q&A if you have any questions for her. So Haley Prochnow is the president of the St. Croix Falls Historical Society and a member of the St. Croix Falls Parks, Arts, and Trails Commission. She also writes a monthly column in the Intercounty Leader called Northern Exposure. Haley's research and writing work fosters passion for historic preservation, community engagement, and cultural enhancement of the St. Croix River Valley. Haley is dedicated to providing access to public historical resources and amplifying representation for underrepresented persons in our community. All right, and with that, I will turn it over to Haley. Thank you so much.
Okay, can everyone see the screen that says Silverbrook and the St. Croix Valley Country Club with a giant map on it? I see nods. Okay, great. I think that's the first time I've been formally introduced before, so it's a lot to live up to. Yeah, so like Alyssa said, we're gonna dig into the history specifically of the area known as Silverbrook tonight. And I first became interested in the area after I first hiked the 2-mile Silverbrook Loop Trail in Interstate Park. So if any of you have ever hiked that trail before, you're well aware that there's a lot of ruins of buildings along that path. And the natural beauty and the isolation of that area is just like, it's unmatched. It's my favorite trail in the park. And so it's that hike and combined with my curiosity that kind of brings to light some of the stories we're going to talk about today. So the Silverbrook estate was first formed in, hold on, I have to move my little Zoom window, was first formed in 1895. And the property was purchased by Hezekiah Holbert, who was a wealthy grain broker from the Twin Cities. And so ultimately, Hezekiah had dreams of becoming this mining mogul and finding copper in the St. Croix River Valley and essentially making money off of the land, which a lot of people were doing at that time. It was a viable thing to do. And with that, I'm going to share a little bit about the Holberts. So what you see on the left-hand side of the screen is the more buttoned-up version of Hezekiah Holbert. In the center is more the rugged individualist era of Holbert. And then all the way at the right is his wife, Fanny. And what we need to know about him is that he was vehemently opposed to any kind of preservation of the area. He referred to what is today known as Interstate Park as a giant pile of rocks. And he was going to fight any kind of preservation of creation of parkland tooth and nail because of this copper mining venture. And with that, just to understand some more about his level of affluence, this is his home at 659 Summit Avenue. So if you're familiar with St. Paul, I'm sure you're familiar with Summit Avenue. This is where the white affluent society lived at that time. Now, this house was big enough for Holbert, Fanny, 7 children, and 3 live-in servants. And so that meant they needed a summer home that would match that level of elegance. And so the photo you see here is what was Silverbrook Mansion. This was a 19-room limestone mansion that overlooked the St. Croix River. It had its own waterfall. It had its own pump house that ran spring water to the property. And there was room enough for the entire family. So there's also servants' quarters, room for Holbert's mother when she was living with them. The property included man-made trout ponds that were fully stocked with trout, artesian wells, mineral springs, all things that you can see remnants of when you hike that property today. And just to give you a better idea of the expanse of the property, this is an aerial view of the Silverbrook estate. Obviously, this was taken much later. This is a photograph from 1953, but I wanted to include it to give you an idea of the expanse of this property and just how massive it was. The little yellow circle in the center of the screen is, of course, the mansion itself. And so, as many of you might know, mining was not really a viable venture here in the St. Croix River Valley. And Holbert's business had failed by 1908. And so he was getting older. He decided to sell the mansion and the adjoining property, and he just went back to St. Paul and lived out the rest of his life there. It's this time period after Holbert that we know a little less about. There's a lot of local rumors surrounding the time period from 1908 to 1929. From what I can tell you in my research, it's just a string of wealthy landowners from St. Paul or Minneapolis using the Silverbrook estate as a country retreat. And so I know a lot of people are like, but there was bootlegging and illegal stuff happening. Crimes are really hard to find as a historian, especially if people didn't get caught. So won't be talking about that much today, but I do want to focus on sort of the next time jump in Silverbrook's history, and that's the time period of 1929 to 1942. And this is when the property was owned by Robert and Nina Payne. They were using it as a country retreat, like many before them. And they were an upper middle class family from the McAllister Groveland neighborhood in St. Paul. They had a house right on McAllister Avenue. This is Robert Payne sitting in the living room of that house playing with his dog. And while we're sort of talking about the Paynes today, they they were the best at documenting the property. So they can really give us an idea of what this place was like. As we know it today, it's overgrown, it's natural, it's back to nature. So through the Payne's documentation, we can really understand what the sort of the visualization of this place was. So on the screen right now, I have a photo of Nina Payne, Robert's wife, and she's leaning on a wading pool that they had built on the property in 1930 with a 20-foot fountain in the center. And this is actually one of the most prominent ruins. If you hike that trail today, you'll see the remnants of this wading pool that I've shown here. And then the photo next to her again is of Robert Payne with his dog in his living room. One great thing that Robert Payne did for us is he actually wrote a exhaustive pamphlet on the Silverbrook property. And my theory for him doing this is probably when he was ready to sell that property, he created this pamphlet and likely pasted in a lot of the photos that I'm going to show you today. But what's great is we can learn so much about the property just from reading what he's written here. So not only was there a mansion on the property, as we know, but there was also a 2-car garage, a stone tool house, a pump house and water tower for carrying water to the house, and a stone barn and a water tower. And so again, the foundations of all of these things are out there in some capacity as you're exploring that area. Another cool thing we can learn, this property was outfitted with electric power, and it had its own special electrical line that was run to the property from St. Croix Falls. The Paynes also, in their time as stewards of the property, they did a lot of modernization and updating. One thing they did was installed radiator and radiator steam heat on the property. And then we also have floor plans, so we can get a better idea of what this place was like on the inside, which has been hard to visualize, right? So what we can learn from looking at this first floor plan, there was 5 bedrooms on the first floor, and my favorite part is a 41-foot screened-in porch overlooking the St. Croix River. In looking at the second floor, again, there's 2 bedrooms upstairs, a sewing room, servants' quarters, and a great hall. So I want to walk you through some of the photographs that the Paynes left. I say left as a quote. They didn't actually leave them to Interstate Park, but these photos ended up at Interstate Park, and we're lucky enough to have them now. So this is a view of the mansion. You can see the trout pond, or one of the trout ponds, in the foreground. Here's the construction of that 20-foot fountain and the wading pool. And then very recognizably, these columns are still there today. This would have held the gates to the property. They're still intact fully. And then this is a view of what the mansion would have looked like if you were standing up by the trailhead parking lot, or Highway S, sort of looking north at the property. I just thought this was interesting that Robert Payne thought to take a nighttime photo to give us an added dimension of what the mansion itself might have looked like at night. And then again, another photo including one of their dogs. So they love to apparently include their dogs in a lot of their photography work. This would have been the view from the back porch, or they refer to it as the front porch of the mansion, looking at the river. And then this is really interesting. So this is if we were standing on the Minnesota side of the river, we can see how much space that this mansion and the clear-cut property around it was really visible. I tried to zoom in on it a little bit. I circled the house We're not used to seeing this today, because of the Wild and Scenic Act. We don't get to see a lot of properties and man-made elements from the river. So it's interesting to see that in Payne's photography. So that brings me to two of the property owners that I have done the most research on and have learned so much about since I first hiked the trail in 2021, like I mentioned. And that's Annabelle and James Rideaux. And they owned the Silverbrook property from 1956 to 1962. And how I started to learn about Annabelle and James was after my initial visit to Interstate Park. Essentially, I said, can I see anything you have on Silverbrook? I feel like there's more to this story of this 1895 mansion and this property. And so one of the first things that I saw was this typed property owners list. I don't know exactly when it was created. I would assume it was probably around the time that the land was sold to the state of Wisconsin. But as you can see here, somebody put together this property owner list, and there's not a lot of information when you look at the time period of 1958 to 1962. And all it says is that James and Annabelle Rideaux operated a drinking club for Blacks from the Twin Cities, which I thought to be a really dismissive line. What does that even mean? And then on top of that, there's an asterisk next to 1958. And if we look at the bottom of this page, and you probably can't read it, but I'll read it to you, it just says information regarding ownership during this period is sketchy. Which again, I thought there was an element of dismissiveness there. And so that really kicked off my curiosity, and I wanted to look into James and Annabelle closer. So right away, that took me into Minnesota to St. Paul again, but this time we were looking at the Rondo neighborhood. And I'm not sure how many of you on the call tonight are familiar with the Rondo neighborhood in St. Paul. It's been in the news a lot lately for good reason, but I'll just share really high level what Rondo is and was. So prior to I-94 being constructed in St. Paul, the Rondo neighborhood was a mixed income neighborhood with a flourishing middle class. It was full of union halls, businesses, community centers, schools, public gathering spaces, and it was home to 80% of St. Paul's African-American population. Another really special thing about Rondo is that it was home to just a great amount of social and civic organizations, and a lot of them were created in Rondo itself. So you'll hear me talk tonight about the Cameo Social Club, the Credjafon Social Club, and the Twin City 40 Club. These groups or these clubs were created out of prejudice that Black St. Paulites faced in the early 20th century. They weren't welcome in white civic organizations. Even the city's restaurants, bars, hotels, and clubs, places to gather, were off limits. And so Rondo was a place to really build community and build those civic organizations there. And so that brings me to James Rideaux. He's our first owner of the country club and a Rondo resident. So James, as you can see in this photo, I'm going to try to circle him with my cursor, but he's kneeling in the front here. And James was born in Louisiana in 1906. He went to college in Kansas, and he studied business and tailoring. Over time, that took him to Chicago and eventually St. Paul. And what I found is when he was living in St. Paul, he worked at the University Club and the Town and Country Club, both of which are extremely affluent white country clubs that are still in existence today. But the bulk of his career was working at Union Depot. So he was a red cap night captain. And as an unofficial part of his job, he would help Black travelers find friendly and safe places to stay. As we know, travel at this time for Black Americans was unpredictable. It depended on where you were going, if you would have a place to stay or not. And so what James would do is help them find a safe place to stay, because he and Annabelle ran a boarding house in Rondo. And so that was just part of his commitment to his community and his fellow Black Americans. What you see here on the screen, a couple of things that don't necessarily fit together, but when James passed away in 1990, he was awarded the Roy Wilkins Award by the NAACP in recognition of his services to the struggle and cause of civil rights. And then I chose to include his draft card, oddly enough, on this page, mostly because it was the very first piece of information that I found that was related to him. And it told me a lot of things. So in looking at his draft card, I see his wife is Annabelle. He's an employee at the University Club. And then I saw his address was 707 Rondo Avenue. And that's an address that doesn't exist today. Now, this is James's wife, Annabelle. She was also born in 1906. She lived in Alabama, and then she moved to Minnesota in 1925. Basically, right away, her name starts appearing in the society column of the St. Paul Recorder, the Minneapolis Spokesman. She was a very gifted seamstress. She taught homemaking classes, community sewing classes. Her descendants even told me that she allegedly tailored some suits for John Dillinger, which could be true. I don't know that for a fact, but it's kind of a cool anecdote. And she was just a member of basically any civic organization you could think of. So Order of the Eastern Star, the St. Anthony Hill Garden Club, the St. Paul Urban League, Cameo Social Club. She was even the Housing Committee Chair for the NAACP National Convention in 1960. So she was involved in so many aspects of her community. And this is another picture of her in the 1950s. She's in the center with the off-the-shoulder dress. And this is a Cameo Club Christmas party. But a lot of what I found right away about Annabelle and James is that they really, truly were pillars of their community. And so that takes us to Rondo. Unfortunately, during the time period of 1956 to 1968, Rondo was quite literally split in half by an interstate system in the name of urban renewal. And so what that really looks like is 700 families, family homes were destroyed or demolished. 300 businesses were closed down or torn down. And to make matters even worse, compensation for possessing these buildings or these homes from people, it was inadequate. It wasn't enough. And so on top of that, we also need to think about, when we're talking about Rondo as a community, schools were destroyed, public parks and green space, community centers, all of these things that tied the community together, again, were destroyed in the name of urban renewal at that point. So when you drive on 94 through St. Paul, think of Rondo. So in my research, I was able to find an old fire insurance map that included 707 Rondo on it. And, looking into that location more, this is where 707 Rondo would be today. So if we were, I believe this street view is from 2019, but If we were driving along what is now called Old Rondo Avenue, we would drive past James and Annabelle's family home. And when they had to move, that was in November of 1959, they announced it in the newspaper of all places. And the announcement is very simple and very elegant, and it just says, "Come December 1st, Mr. and Mrs. James Rideaux of 707 Rondo Avenue will be greeting their friends in their newly decorated and remodeled home at 765 Marshall Avenue." So that leads me to the country club. So this is what, this was the reality that James and Annabelle were facing during this time period. But they also decided to open a country club for their community. And so when they bought the Silverbrook property, it was likely November of 1956. They renamed it the St. Croix Valley Country Club, and they were going to offer outdoor sports and recreation to their community. And when I first started this research, I kind of wondered why that location. Of course, it's beautiful, but why there? And very quickly, I noticed a long-standing history of Rondo social clubs and community organizations recreating in the St. Croix River Valley in general. And so it wouldn't have been unusual for them to think, let's open a club there. And so I've included a few newspaper mentions from when they first opened their doors, but the most notable one that I wanted to share with you tonight, you're actually the first people I've ever shared it with because I found it last week. In December of 1956, there's a really nice write-up about an open house at the country club. And that would have been their very first event at the country club when they opened. And the most notable thing about this open house event is that 300 people from St. Paul came out to support the Rideaux and to enjoy the 200-acre estate of their friends. And so this was a formal affair. From reading the newspaper article, we learned that guests were served refreshments in the spacious ballroom from a long Chinese antique table of teakwood inlaid with mother of pearl. They had even hired a pianist for the occasion who also brought her pet bird with, apparently. I don't know, but it sounds really cool. And so with that, I wanted to show you this interior photo of Silverbrook. It's one of the few that I've ever seen. And that is Annabelle leaning up against the fireplace. There is the teak wood table mentioned in the newspaper article. And if you want to think about it in terms of today's orientation, the double doors on either side of the fireplace would have been looking out at the falls. So if you can imagine what a wonderful view that would have been from this ballroom or this grand room. Here's another photo of the interior. Admittedly, I don't know a lot about this photo. This is just one, again, that the descendants shared with me. I do know that the little boy sitting on that man's lap, his name is Joel, and I actually got to hike the Silverbrook Trail with him. He is an adult now, obviously, a couple of years ago. So one notable event that I want to cover with you all tonight is that beyond offering this place of relaxation and recreation, some really important community events and conversations were happening at the St. Croix Valley Country Club. And specifically, I wanted to look at this event from January 20th, 1957. There's an annual meeting of the St. Paul NAACP branch at the country club. And so, of course, it's an annual meeting. They're installing new officers. But the topic of the evening is a discussion of the moral aspects of segregated housing. And we have two instrumental civil rights leaders from the Twin Cities there. So on the left is Reverend Floyd Massey Jr. He was the first Black man ever elected as chairman of the state's pastors conference. He was an activist for housing equity. He later in life moved to the Los Angeles Watts neighborhood, and he led a congregation there until 1987. The man on the right is Reverend Denzel Carty, and he also was a huge housing equity activist, an activist for desegregation in the school and workplace. And most notably, Reverend Carty lobbies to the Minnesota State Legislature for the passage of the Minnesota Fair Housing Act in 1961. So the passage of that act before it had even reached the federal level yet. And so they have this event at the country club on January 20th. And in looking through newspapers, I noticed the next day, January 21st, Reverend Carty and Massey are meeting with Martin Luther King Jr. at Reverend Massey's house. So Martin Luther King Jr. was in the Twin Cities speaking at the state pastors conference. And I think it just really shows the connectivity of the civil rights movement at that time, especially when the Midwest. I think a lot of the time as Midwesterners, you think of the civil rights, we think of the civil rights movement as a Southern thing. But in studying and looking at Reverends Massey and Carty and their relationship to this national leader, we realized it really was a national effort, and there was a lot of connectivity within that. Plus, it's just cool to see, oh, James and Annabelle were that level of connected that they were bringing these leaders to the St. Croix River Valley through their country club. So a few more newspaper mentions here. I will not read them all to you, but it's just fun to really study the kinds of events that happened at the country club. So in looking at the society column of newspapers, we learned that this place was really a place of Black excellence, of luxury. There were debutantes and birthday parties and hunting and archery and all of these great things happening at the property. And when I connected with Annabelle and James's descendants, they really credit Annabelle for a lot of that. They said she was nothing but the quintessential high society hostess. And so she really was the driving force behind the St. Croix Valley Country Club. James was more reserved. He liked the solitude that the property offered, and he did a lot of the maintenance work on the property. One notable thing about Annabelle is she chartered the first cotillion program in the upper Midwest. And this was the Cameo Club Cotillion program. She was the chairperson for that from 1957 to 1961. And so if you're not familiar with a cotillion, it's sort of like a pageant. So young ladies come in, they learn charms, they go to charm school, they do luncheons together, slumber parties, that sort of thing. And what was really great is that a lot of those events were hosted at the country club. So Annabelle would charter a bus, drive the debutantes to the St. Croix River Valley. They'd have a fun weekend, and then they'd travel back to St. Paul for their culminating cotillion ball at the end of the season. And so here we have some of the debutantes. In looking a little bit further at some of these young women, many of the debutantes that participated in this program went on to have really impactful, community-minded careers. And one of those women is Joyce Ann Hughes. She is at the very top of the staircase. I'm not sure if you can see my cursor. At the very top of the staircase in Silverbrook. And she was the first Black woman to teach at the University of Minnesota Law School and then receive a tenure track position at any historically white institution. She went on to do a lot of great things, but I do know that she was on the board of directors for the National Urban League. And so she kind of continued this, this community pattern of service, or exemplified it rather. And so whether or not, Annabelle would have called it that, or called it female empowerment, anything like that, it really was ahead of its time in supporting these young women to go on and have really meaningful careers. And so the Cameo Club, like I said, was a really big part of Annabelle's life. This is a photo from the club's 50th anniversary in 1975. I put stars over James and Annabelle's heads just to more easily show them to you. What's really great is the Cameo Club is still a club today. So they're still active. They're still doing community events together, cookouts, picnics, that sort of thing. It's just great to see that legacy continuing. And so now we get to the unfortunate part of the property's history. So as I said, Annabelle and James, they owned the property from 1956 to 1962, and ultimately they ended up foreclosing. From conversations with family, basically it just became too difficult with what was changing in St. Paul at that time. The distance, just the logistics of getting up there to take care of the mansion, it was just too much. And so as things shifted and splintered, they lost the property in 1962. And it's at that time a real estate developer purchases the property. It falls into total disrepair. I believe at one point he did hire a family to live there to sort of guard it. But in the early 1970s, I believe around 1970, he ends up selling the 200-acre estate to the state of Wisconsin. And I think the state knew they wanted to make it part of Interstate Park, but they didn't know what to do with the house, or the mansion rather. And so it sat empty for 4 years. It was vandalized. I've heard so many stories of people who were like, yeah, when I was a kid, we would totally go run around. It's haunted. So lots of teenage hijinks and things. But by 1974, the state of Wisconsin decided we're just going to raze it completely. We're going to burn it down and just bury the rubble in the ground. And so that's why there's really hardly any trace of the mansion today. So really quickly, if you haven't hiked the Silverbrook Trail today, in current times or in the past, it's an amazing trail. Of course, not that great in the winter, but in the fall and summer months, it's quite beautiful. I just included some of my personal photos here. You can see the old gates to the driveway. If you look at this photo all the way on the right, the gates at the top of Highway S are still, or parts of the gates are still intact. The wells that were dug by the Holberts are still there. The trout ponds are still there. And of course, the waterfall is still there. Unfortunately, some of the ruins have faced vandalism, but we can see that the pillars from the gates are there. And then I tried to photograph the wading pond ruins in this photo all the way on the right, but it's not a great photo. But that sort of leads me to what's going on today. So I've mentioned the descendants a lot in this presentation. I actually became friends with Annabelle's great-granddaughter using Ancestry.com. So if there ever was an ad for Ancestry.com, I think that's it. We were both researching her great-grandmother. We started to share information, and it turned out that Sherelle was creating a documentary on her family ancestry. And so her and I since we connected in 2021, have really been partnering on a lot of this research and how we want to document this research and this history. And the current effort is to work with the Friends of Interstate Park and the DNR to include some educational signage on the trail somewhere. And so we are currently awaiting to hear back on some grant applications that we've worked on collaboratively. And then we'll work with Sherelle and her family to decide how to best exemplify this time period in history and to tell her family's story. And so really, I'm just sharing that to show you all this is such an ongoing process. Like I said, I'm still learning new things all the time. And it's been really great to get to know James and Annabelle's family and to watch them kind of reconnect over this history. It's something I would have never even guessed I would ever be a part of when I first started to really dig into this. But it's been really cool to find out new things together along the way. So with that, that is all I had to share with you tonight, but I believe we wanted to open it up to questions.
If anyone has questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask away.
I do want to add that all of this research that I shared, a portion of it with you tonight. If you do read St. Croix 360, the online sort of local news source in the area about the St. Croix River Valley, there is an exhaustive sort of article that I initially wrote in 2022 about this research, and I would be more than happy to share the resource or the URL with everybody.
Kelly, I have a question.
Yeah.
My name is Joe Johnson.
Hi.
I lived in the old town of Franconia
Mhm.
from the time I was 4 in 1949 for 70 years. I now live in Stillwater. But I also was born and raised in St. Paul, and I remember the Rondo area before it was devastated by 94.
Yeah.
I am so moved by this because I was not aware of this, even though I lived through a lot of it on the St. Croix.
Yeah.
Is this near the Horst property, what we've become to know as the Horst property?
I'm not familiar with the horse property.
How far upstream from downtown Osceola is it?
Ooh, 10 minutes. I mean, by car.
Okay,
I'm
that's
thinking-
further. Yeah, that's further than Horst and on Highway S.
Yeah. Yeah. Highway S. It's right off of Highway S.
I know that highway extremely well.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to want to talk to you further, and I will give you a call.
Okay. That's great.
Because I have so much history here,
Yeah.
and I have interest in what you're doing, and I want to know what I can do to help.
Okay. That's great. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Any other questions?
Haley,
How do
I
you
can
hear me?
I can hear you. Yep.
Okay. Joe, it's about maybe do you know where the trout ponds are? Where they raise trout
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
on Highway S?
Yeah, they're
It's just north of that, about maybe 2 miles.
okay.
And I know where that is too. So thank you.
Okay.
This was an amazing presentation,
Good.
and your research, it was just fascinating. It was like watching a detective at work, and this is a place that is very near and dear to my heart, and I am so enriched by knowing about the history.
Yep.
I will not see this place with the same eyes again, even though I spend so much time there.
Yeah.
So my question, with Northwoods and Waters being the sponsor of this presentation and with our audience, there are many people who will watch this after this program, and I'm wondering how we can help with the signage or help with the ongoing recognition of the history of the place and of the Black community within the St. Croix Valley. There are many examples of very prominent and important families and very rich history of Black people from Prescott all the way north to the logging camps. But the Black history has been really sublimated, and I think this is a great example, and nice that it's in Black History Month. Thank you so much for that planning, Alyssa and Jasmine. So what can we do to help?
That's a great question. So like I said, right now, our biggest, Sherelle and I put our heads together. So Sherelle is based in DC. She's a filmmaker. Her focus is the documentary piece, really exploring her family history and what it means to heal from a loss like this. So think of if you had a family member that had 200 acres along the St. Croix and they lost that. That's an incredible loss of wealth. And so her and I have been trying to raise funding for this signage initiative or some way to commemorate this history. And like I said, right now we're really partnering and leaning on the Friends of Interstate Park. And so we all represent a multitude of nonprofits here tonight, me representing the St. Croix Falls Historical Society, but I really see them as the leaders in that initiative. And so I would reach out to the Friends of Interstate Park, support them if you can, because I know their group and the Wisconsin DNR is heavily interested in preserving this history. If you get Wisconsin Natural Resources magazine, an article just came out. They interviewed both Sherelle and I to share this research. And the editor of that magazine referred to the Silverbrook history as a state treasure. And so I think people are really starting to realize that. And so the more of us that can kind of hold that in our hearts and communicate that with the DNR and the state park, the better chance there is for this history to be preserved. Good question.
Hi, this is Derek Anderson. I'm on the Friends of Interstate Board of Directors, and if you're interested in finding ways to help with this project, like Haley mentioned, feel free to reach out to us at some point, and we can brainstorm and think of ideas to help move things along. Like Haley mentioned, we've got some grant applications that we're hoping to hear back from in the next month or so, and to move forward with developing interpretive signage and highlighting some of these stories that Haley shared tonight. So it's a very exciting. We're very glad to partner with her and the Historical Society and the family and get recognition here. So
yeah, thanks, Derek. I'm glad you're here. Glad you chimed in.
Haley,
Hi.
I had a question.
Oh.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you looked in the local press to see if it would seem like 300 people partying on County Road S might have been in the local press too, because it's so often little blurbs about, Mrs. Jones came and had lunch with Mrs. Wilson and
Yeah, what's hard about that is is a lot of our, especially here in St. Croix Falls, the standard press is, it's never been digitized or scanned. So I know at the St. Croix Falls Library, we have microfilm for some time periods, but we don't have a microfilm reader. So if you want to read the microfilm, you have to take it and then you got to drive to Osceola and use their microfilm reader. We have some hard copies. It's just, I think that's a really great lead and a good point. It's just the old newspapers are, if they haven't been digitized or scanned, they're really time consuming to track down and go through. But I thought the same thing, 300 people on Highway S, you would think would have, someone would have noticed.
Yeah, and did you look in the Osceola paper?
No, I haven't.
They might have noticed it too, but I don't
Yeah,
know if the bridge was up yet then or not, if people would have come across that bridge, maybe.
yeah.
Maybe Marty knows, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was in the Osceola paper too.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, that'd be great.
I too have a quick question. This is Gary Noreen. I lived in Franconia for a number of years. Hi to Joe Johnson. I heard many stories about this area and also that there was a ski hill there once. Did you hear anything about that?
Yes, there was. So when I showed that that aerial photo from 1953,
Yeah.
that would have been around the time period of when it was a Swiss style ski lodge. And it only operated for a couple of seasons before the owner actually passed away.
Oh.
And so then it sat empty, and then that's when it was sold to the Rideaux family.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. These are great questions. Thanks.
Haley, there
Hi.
was a-
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to read your question from the chat, Gail, so go right ahead.
No, go ahead, Jasmine. Go ahead.
The question in the chat was, do you have any idea on the number of people of color living in the area during this time and how it compares to now?
I do not. So my focus with this project was specifically looking at the Rondo neighborhood and the connection between recreational use of happening in the St. Croix River Valley. However, this research has kind of led to other things as these things go. And I am currently working on an article for the Ramsey County Historical Society that details 3 other families from Rondo that purchased land in the St. Croix River Valley, specifically Polk County, for recreational usage. And one of these families that I want to encourage you to go out and read about is Frederick McGee. And he owned 40 acres on the Apple River near Amory in 1909. His family owned it until around 1920. And Frederick McGee lived in Rondo. He was Minnesota's first Black lawyer, and he was also one of the founding members of the NAACP. So he was really close friends with W.E.B. Du Bois. W.E.B. Du Bois was even at the farm or the cabin on the Apple River in Amory. He would come out and visit, and they would recreate, they would fish, and they would spend time there. So if you go to the St. Croix Falls Historical Society, we have a blog on our website. I recently wrote a short article about Frederick McGee and his life in Polk County. Again, for the purpose of recreation. He didn't live here full time, but he came out here to relax.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This is Gail. I have another question, and I just think it's so amazing that it sounds like history isn't your academic field, but that you've kind of have this citizen perspective of wanting to learn more, which is always very inspiring for me. My question for you is, It sounds like you've done a lot of work in trying to seek out the family members and get
Yeah.
their side of the story. And
Yeah.
that's so to be commended. Can you talk a little bit more about, kind of like those perspectives and how it shifted the way you were looking at things? I mean, I think there's just this recognition as white people tell non-white stories is always a little suspect these days. And it sounds like you're trying really hard to
Yeah.
look at the perspective.
Yeah.
And how does that feel? How does that look? What have you learned?
Yeah. And I'm still learning, right? I'm not an expert on racial equity, especially in history and communicating those stories. I think first and foremost, especially with the Silverbrook research, as I started to find out more and as the story got bigger, I knew that this was not my story to tell. And I totally lucked out and ran into Sherelle and became friends with Sherelle, and I've met her entire family. And it's just like, it's been this awesome thing that we've been able to work on together. But as I approach telling other stories that are, not white history, I want to first and foremost acknowledge that it's not my story to tell, so I need to be comfortable in finding descendants, finding family members. Luckily, I've been dealing in a time period where I can find people who are still living that remember these things. When it comes to other aspects of history, I think looking at it more from a perspective of how can I help or am I helping, rather than just trying to chase down a story. And so that's something that I'm kind of repeating to myself all the time as I work through this stuff. And sort of my personal, I think, drive for finding this information is really about representation in our community, right? I think when I first started to dig into this Silverbrook stuff, I had a discussion with another historian from the area, and he very blatantly said to me, there's no Black people here, and there never have been. And so I kind of took that as a challenge, like, that's not true. There's Black people everywhere. And so it really just proved to me that representation matters, especially in our public places, in parks. If these histories exist, then we need to kind of reshift our focus and how we're talking about public land. I hope I answered your question, Gail. I don't know. That's a tough question.
It is. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Hi, Haley. I have another question.
Mm-hmm.
On your center picture, you
Yeah.
have where the two brick columns go, and it goes up towards the copper mine.
Yeah.
Where was the actual driveway? Was it that or the
So
road to the right?
yeah. So my understanding is that the road to the copper mine was actually the old Highway S.
It was?
Somebody, I think so. Before the current day Highway S is. Do not quote me on that. That's just something I haven't really looked into. So I've heard that's the old Highway S, and then this other driveway up to the new S was from later. So that's one possible explanation for these two. So yes, the path or the trail on the right-hand side of the screen, that goes straight up to the highway.
And that would have been the actual driveway then.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Correct. Okay.
Yep.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm just wondering why did you have those brick columns on the left-hand side?
Good question. I'm not sure either.
No?
No, I don't know.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Yep.
I think since we've got about 2 minutes left here, I'll take over and wrap up. Anyone's welcome to stay on after the fact if there's more questions or anything like that. I'll just go ahead and get this out of the way so that we don't have to worry about it here.
Cool.
So thank you to Haley and to everyone who came and joined us tonight. It's a wonderful presentation, very interesting. I'm very glad we could all be here. If you are interested in joining for our next one, they are the third Tuesday of every month, so that next one will bring us to March 19th. And then again, for our social media, we have Facebook and Instagram. And so I will leave those up there for a second for anyone who wants to follow us there. But thank you all again so much for joining us tonight, and hope to see you next month.